So, I don't know if anybody's ever talked about this, if you will, but when it comes to, the original trilogy of Yu-Gi-Oh shows, which, you know, 20, well, not 20, but, which about 12 years ago, 12, 11 years ago, all came together for a crossover called Bonds Beyond Time, which I did recently a review on. And it's a good film, despite the timeline headache that a lot of people say it gives. When it comes to the original trilogy, and the reason I believe it's so beloved is despite the differences, utilized in the series, in the GX and 5D series that followed the original, they always, the common thing that they had is they always stayed true to the original. In other words, they, stayed true to the concept. One of those concepts, of course, being that each had a variation of the dual disc introduced in season 2. Jaden's, of course, was more, futuristic, based off the academy that he was a part of, Dueling Academy, the dome, if you will, based off the dome, the dormitory, the apartment, if you will, that he stayed in when it came to the academy. And then, of course, you had Yusei's, which is very similar and identical to the original. And I think the other thing that, made them beloved with a lot of the fans, even to this day, is they kept that connection that the original had. In other words, each of the main characters, like Yugi before them, had a connection to the spirit world, and had a connection pretty much to, in a sense, an extension, if you will, in sense and an extension, I should say. They pretty much had a connection not just to the spirit world, the shadow realm, whatever you want to call it, but also to ancient Egypt. Just, like I said, based on the characters that they would communicate with, like Baron and Yubel for Jaden, and, the Crimson Dragon for Yusei and such. And, and to me, with those elements in there, and also keeping the elements of the friendships being the way they were, or the being, developed the way they were, again, to me, is what, kept the original trilogy, and still keeps it, very beloved by fans to this day. However, and I know this will be, very devised, and I know it might get some back and forth comments. I believe that afterwards, when we got into things like Zexal and an Arc 5 and VRains and even Sevens and all that, and I think even now with Go Rush, even though those are very popular follow-ups, animes, mangas, if you will, that came afterwards to continue the Yu-Gi-Oh franchise, and even though Zexal kind of had a connection as well, there were some things that changed up. One, with Zexal, the dual disc, as far as I know, were no longer being utilized. And it was just something else. It was like some kind of thing that was different. Now, I'm not saying that dual disc weren't, involved or anything. They still kind of keep the dual disc thing going, but like I said, it was modified in a way that just I think kind of threw fans off. And even though, like I said, it was very popular, and it kind of did keep the spirit thing going with that alien spirit or whatever it is that the main character would communicate with and try to help out. Even though it kept, that portion of it around, which I think helped, make it popular in the eyes of a lot of fans, there was just some things that were changing up. Like they had these visors now with, over their eyes. And the visors allowed them to go into, I guess you could say, this Matrix-like world when they would duel. Not a virtual world, but a Matrix-like environment. Um, and even though that was a cool concept, because when you look at the dual runners, if you will, that they introduced in 5Ds, yeah, that was a unique kind of concept to dueling, a unique advancement in it. Don't get me wrong. Um, you know, there were still fans that were kind of, wondering if maybe, they were, Funimation, Konami, NAS, if they were, kind of going off the, off the rails with it. But again, I think what kept it popular is that connection that Yusei had with the Crimson Dragon Spirit, and the fact that one of his main ways of dueling was a dual disc similar and identical to the one in Battle City, Season 2 of the original series. So yeah, with Zexal, you like I said, you still kind of kept that spirit thing going, but the catch there is the spirit that was connected, the alien spirit, I should say, that was connected with the main character. If the main character, didn't get a certain amount of cards, a certain number of cards, and everything, and basically would, lose a duel, potentially lose a duel, then that alien creature, spirit, whatever, would die. Now, I'll admit that's kind of a unique catch because we've never seen that somewhat in previous Duel Monsters, or Yu-Gi-Oh! Series, I should say. So I'll admit that's a unique catch, but the goal was to collect so many cards, a numeric amount of cards, if you will, to help restore the memories of this person. Very similar to Atem in his situation with, okay, I need to unlock my memories. How do I do that? And the main way was, the Millennium items, getting all the items together and everything, or getting all 3 Egyptian gods cards, presenting them, and all that. So there was that similarity. And, to me, Zexal, it still kept the thing, it still kept the Yu-Gi-Oh! Trend that people were known for around, but they changed it up in a way that, even though, like I said, some of the elements they kept, made it popular and beloved by a lot of fans, there were some things about it they didn't like. Like, I'm sure a lot of fans didn't like the visor thing. Like, that took them into a Matrix-like world. Or the fact that they basically, as the show progressed, they started to basically now travel across space. Because not only was this alien, not only was this spirit, or whatever the name was, an ancient alien spirit that had lost their memories, very similar to Atem did, very similar to the way Atem did in the original series. But now they had to cross, not just space, but they had to travel through space to travel across dimensions and all that. And now you were suddenly, and even though that's a cool concept and everything, now you were seeing dual monster matches taking place in other dimensions, other worlds. And it was just like, to a lot of folks, even though the core of what made Yu-Gi-Oh! From the beginning very popular was still there, it's like all of a sudden they started going down a different path, and they were starting to not necessarily go off the rails just yet, but go in a direction that felt like, felt like basically something that was, it had some resemblance to Yu-Gi-Oh! But like I said, it had some resemblance to Yu-Gi-Oh! Like I said, it had some resemblance to Yu-Gi-Oh! But it felt like it was, going off in a different direction and becoming something else. Like I said, even though it still kept the core elements of Yu-Gi-Oh! In there, it felt like it was, becoming something else when they started to do the go through space and then through space into different dimensions, and you're starting to see the dueling take place in other, dimensions with, non, Earth, characters or anything like that, alien-like human characters and stuff that would, basically change their appearance. Like they would go into, I guess you could say they would don, if you will, their Super Saiyan, Super Sentai, Power Ranger-like outfits, before they dueled. So, so to me, I think when they started to go in that direction, and I'm not saying that some people didn't enjoy it, some did. If not, if not a majority, I'll put it this way: I know people did enjoy it, but still, you could tell, from my personal point of view, from where I've read up and heard other people say, that it felt like, even though it was, a cool concept, it just felt like it was becoming, something more than Yu-Gi-Oh was. Like it was trying to be its own series, trying to be something different that wasn't related to Yu-Gi-Oh because of, what they were doing. So to me, I think that even though Zexal was a very popular series, and like I said, kept the core of the original trio of Yu-Gi-Oh series that came before it alive, it started as soon as they started to go into space and different dimensions and all that, that, and then you having like see these human alien-like creatures, um, doing the dueling, and before doing that, suiting up in these Super Sentai Power Ranger-like outfits. I think that's when a lot of fans started to be like, okay, we know this is Yu-Gi-Oh, but it feels like it's a different show entirely. So yeah, I think that as soon as they started to go in that direction, things started to change a little bit. And I know some people might say, well, what about what they did in the original Yu-Gi-Oh? They did virtual reality. They did kind of a virtualness, if you will. They went into the past, and that's true, they did, but they saved a lot of that, towards the end. They saved a lot of that towards the end. And I'll admit, look, I haven't seen Zexal, but I can definitely say, in my opinion, that however they got to the whole alien going into space dimension, human-like aliens being duelists now and everything, I can tell you honestly from what I've read and heard, it feels like that even though they had a plan, it didn't go off the way they would want. Like they got to where they wanted to get to, just not the way they were hoping. Kind of like like I said, with the original Yu-Gi-Oh, and I think GX and 5Ds to an extent as well. But again, like I said, I believe the moment they went into that, into that story arc of going into space and again, like I said, the moment they did all that, I think it's when fans were questioning whether or not this was still Yu-Gi-Oh or if it was becoming something else. And again, it kept the spirit, like the core of what made the original series GX and 5Ds popular. It's just that they went down a route that I think unlike the previous three shows, felt like it just came out of nowhere. Like as I was mentioning, like the planning and the execution for it was was okay, was good. It's just that they didn't, they weren't able to execute it the way they were hoping, and we don't know if maybe that was due to I would say edits, like scenes being cut, reduced and stuff and everything, or edited down, and things like that. We don't know if that might have been it, might have been what hurt it, but like I said, from what I've read and heard, people loved it. It just, when it went down that route, of going into space and then different dimensions through space, and oh, by the way, we have these human-like aliens that dress up in Power Ranger Super Sentai like outfits before they duel. It just really was. It really was something that, again, I think kind of threw people off. Like they expect the kind of they expect the unusual sometimes, or for the Yu-Gi-Oh series to go in a direction that might be like unexpected, or maybe to them off the scales, if you will. But they also expect it to have some kind of like I would say some kind of sensibility to it, and basically basically to them you know, I'm guessing, just my opinion, I'm guessing that this didn't do it. This did not do it the way they were hoping, if you know what I mean. And it's not just Zexal. I think Zexal, if I'm going to give any credit here, I would say Zexal at least, like I said, try to keep it, true to the original core, and pretty much was the last, effort. Well, not, I wouldn't say effort, but last true, you carrying on of the original series. But then we get to VRains. I think VRains was next. Well, not VRains, but Arc 5. And even though they tried something different there and everything, I think what made Arc 5 popular, but not as popular as, let's say, Zexal, so, like I said, getting to Arc 5, I think what made it popular, but not so popular as, let's say, Zexal, is the way they did things. I mean, yes, the uniqueness of the main male protagonist, eventually becoming an antagonist or the main antagonist towards the end, but not of his own will, that was unique, I'll give it that. But I think what made this kind of like, mixed among fans, in my opinion, from what I could tell, from, as I said earlier, from what I've read and heard, is the fact that you had not just the main character, but you had his sister, which was a co-female character, not the main female character, a co-main character, which again, basically, justifies what I said, what I've been saying, that, and others have been saying, that, it is now time for a main female protagonist, a singletary, if you will, singletary main female protagonist to step forward and be in the spotlight and all that. But anyway, like I said, even though the uniqueness of, the main protagonist becoming like the main antagonist, but not of his own will, it was, intriguing and, innovative, if you will. I think what held it back was you had the main character and his sister, or we're assuming it's his sister, split themselves into four different entities that spawned, that was spread across, spiraled across, if you will, different dimensions, in other words, different worlds. And even though people would say, oh, that's kind of that kind of stays true to the original, Yu-Gi-Oh! Spiritual concept and everything, like in the original, that is true to an extent. But as I was saying, the thing that I think kind of really threw people off was, like I said, I think what really, as I was trying to say, threw people off was, they try to justify is, having the main character and his sister, which is like a co-main character, split into four different, individuals across four different dimensions. And even though people would say, oh, that's somewhat true to the original spirit thing with Yugi, the thing is, here's the thing, Yugi and Atem, shared a body. Atem was housed within the Millennium Puzzle, and he came out whenever Yugi needed guidance, or whenever Yugi was in a duel where basically, on his own he may not, be ready to take on such a big duel, and his attempt to, step in for him and stuff like that. So, even though people can try to justify that, it's still one concept, I think, is what threw a lot of people off. Because again, not only are you incorporating the dimensional thing, different worlds, dimension thing that we, that we got basically somewhat in VRains, if you will. But now you're basically adding in the fact that, oh, there's all these different versions of our main character and his sister, and oh, by the way, our main character in one of those worlds, mainly the prime world, if you will, is being used and eventually being used and manipulated to eventually become the antagonist towards the end, even though it's against his will, or something like that. So to me, Arc 5, I think the reason it wasn't as popular, like I said, as Zexal and all that, is because of the fact that it went in that direction of, let's split, the main character and his sister into 4 different entities. But as I was saying, I think when they made that decision to do that, even though Arc 5 was still beloved by fans, it just wasn't at that level that Zexal was before it, because of what they did. And I think basically, going in that direction of splitting the main protagonist and his sister, if you will, into different, like I said, different entities across different worlds and dimensions. Like I said, even though people will try to justify, oh, it's got similarity to the original, that's not the case. Because basically, you're having them split into 4 different bodies, and in the prime world, where the series is centered at, you have the brother, basically being manipulated and, manipulated to eventually become the antagonist of the series towards the end, against his own will. And like I said, even though that's kind of a unique concept to go with, still the direction of, oh, let's split, our main characters, our main male character, our main featured character, and his co-main character, his sister, into these different bodies and all that, across different dimensions. Just, again, like I said, towards the end with Zexal and what they did, I think threw a lot of fans off. It just really threw them off and threw them for a loop, because even though some would consider it a unique concept, it just felt like it wasn't really, true to the Yu-Gi-Oh, true to the original core of what made Yu-Gi-Oh great, or made a Yu-Gi-Oh series great up to that point. I mean, again, it still had its fans, but still there was, something about it that I think threw some fans off. And I think the splitting of the main character and his sibling, across different dimensions into different bodies was one of, if not the main reason for that. And then we get to VRains. Now, VRains I have not watched, but obviously it's more beloved than Arc 5 or Arc V. And I'm not going to deny that. I even did a video responding to what Dylan Yu-Gi-Oh! Everything had to say in a video he did last year on one of the main, if not the main, female protagonist, if you will. But here's the thing about VRains. Yes, the concept of plugging yourself into virtual reality and, inhabiting the body of an avatar that represents everything that you want to be, that you envision yourself to be, and allowing that avatar to represent you as you duel in this virtual world, it's a great concept. It really is. But I think what hurt it, in a sense, was that concept. It was the fact that now all of a sudden, instead of dueling in the real world, maybe with a few advancements here and there, now all of a sudden you're just going to go plug yourself into virtual reality, give yourself a different, avatar, to represent what you feel like, or you want to be on the outside. Basically represent what you want to be on the outside, because that's how you believe yourself to be on the inside. I think, again, even though it's a unique concept and more well received, it still threw fans off, because they were always used to every character, even Zexal, and to an extent, Arc V always kept the duels within the realms of that series, real world, if you will, and kept it within the real, life. There was no travel into virtual reality and all that to duel. They kept it always in the real world. Now, I know some people would say, well, what about what they did in the Noah arc, if you will, in the middle of Battle City, or what they did in the virtual arc after before Dungeon Dice, if you will, or before the thing with Rebecca and before the Rebecca miniseries and Dungeon Dice in the first season, and then, like I said, with the Noah arc in the middle of the second and third season. And look, I understand that. I get that. They did do that. There is no doubt about it. They did, do that. And everything. They did do that. But they did it in a way to where the characters, basically the characters didn't change into different avatars. They remained as themselves. Even when they did the Capsule Monsters deal, if you will, introducing a new way to duel, a new concept that is, basically they kept the same avatars. Now, I know people are going to say, well, you just brought up Capsule Monster, Brian. That's a different way of dueling than the dual disc. I understand that. But guess what? The Capsule Monster thing, even though they tried to promote that as a new way to duel, didn't last long, and they just remained with the dual disc. I want you to keep that in mind. Okay? Keep that in mind. That they tried, but it failed, and they just kept going with the dual disc. But what I'm getting at though, basically is, yes, they did do that in those various, portions of the original series. But the characters always kept their own different, but the characters always kept being themselves, They weren't, changing themselves into different avatars and all that, unless, something called for it. Like what happened to Tristan in the Noah arc when he had his body stolen by one of the big wigs, if you will, one of the big five, and he ended up inhabiting the body of a toy monkey in the virtual world. The point that I'm getting at is this. Yes, it has been done. But most of the time, the characters were themselves, except, like I said, with that one exception. When it came to Tristan. But when you look at VRains, even though it was more widely accepted and beloved than Arc V, Arc 5, what really was different about it that I think threw people for a loop, even though they still accepted it more and beloved it more than Arc V, Arc 5, what threw them off basically was the fact that all the duels were mainly taking place in virtual reality. Yeah, there were consequences of, a duelist potentially losing in virtual reality, happening on the outside world in actual reality. There was that. I'm not denying it. Like when Blue Ring Girl, that AO's character got beat by the main villain in the second season, according to Dylan of Yu-Gi-Oh! Everything, she ended up getting absorbed into a tower. She became part of a tower temporarily till the end, and then she got freed again, and then she took on the avatar of Blue Girl and then Blue Maiden. The point is, even though it was a cool concept and everything, in a unique way of doing duel matches and everything, it still was a little off-putting for fans, because they were always used to a character like the main protagonist in there, like AZ, I'll call her AZ, Blue Girl, if you will, dueling in the real world. And I think that's what threw them off. But I will give VRains credit for being more accepted, in my opinion, from what I've seen and heard, more accepted and beloved than Arc V, Arc 5. Sevens, obviously, they had a fan base, there's no doubt. They obviously had a fan base and everything behind them. But I think because, they were changing things up as well. I'll admit, trying to stay true to the original core setting of Yu-Gi-Oh! But, changing things up a little bit to make it more different as well. I think the reason they shorted the series and made it, basically the shortest series in the history of all the Yu-Gi-Oh! Animes and mangas that came before and potentially afterwards wasn't because they were in a hurry to get to Go Rush. It wasn't that. It wasn't the fact that they were in a hurry to get to Go Rush. No. What they wanted to do, or what I'm trying to say is the reason they did that is because I think they realized, looking back at how the previous two were accepted, the previous three mostly, Zexal during its second half, if you will, of its series was accepted, and then along with Arc V and VRains, I think they didn't want to chance the fact. I don't think they wanted to chance the fact that sevens might end up getting the same mixed, if not negative, reaction that the other two did, and so they decided to shorten the series and focus more on what Go Rush will be. Now, Go Rush is an entirely different story because you're going to have two twins that are going to be co-main characters. You're going to have an alien soldier coming to Earth that's going to be the main character. And right now, we don't know exactly what that's going to bring to the table. But if it goes the direction some people are speculating it may go, especially with this guy being an alien soldier from another world, coming to Earth and being intrigued by the dual monster stuff and taking part in it. If people are speculating the directive of where it may go down the line, depending on how many episodes it is based on the manga it's going to be adapted from, that right there will tell the story whether or not it's, even through this unique concept, of bringing in an alien soldier from another world to be our main duelist. Basically, how they, run with it is what is going to basically decide whether or not it's going to be beloved by fans, or it's going to be, mixed, or it's going to get a mixed reaction, or it's going to be, panned by fans. Because if it gets a mixed reaction, if you will, by fans, then hey, at least fans, at least there's a core group of fans that like it. There's a core group of fans that find it interesting, intriguing. But then on the other side, you have fans that don't like it because it doesn't feel like Yu-Gi-Oh! But if it gets a positive reaction, then it shows that maybe the people behind it, and apparently there's a new crew behind it, a new creative team behind it, I think a new studio somewhat behind it, that, if it gets a positive reaction, then it shows that maybe they're, learning from their mistakes and, moving forward, in a direction that relies basically on what made Yu-Gi-Oh! Popular at the beginning. So if it gets a positive reaction, it means basically that they're going in a direction that feels like they realize the mistakes they've made, and they're going to remedy that with this version of Yu-Gi-Oh! And if that happens, that's great. But if it gets a negative reaction overall, then it shows that not only have they derailed from what made Yu-Gi-Oh! What it is, but it seems that what's going on is they're trying to use any incarnation of Yu-Gi-Oh! To try to introduce us to a new kind of anime. Like, they're trying to, like with Zexal to an extent, they're trying to use, especially the second half that is, they're trying to use it to introduce us to a new anime franchise that is based on Yu-Gi-Oh! But it's its own thing. And if they do that with Go Rush, depending, like I said, how long it's going to be, because you got to look at how long the manga is and everything, then, and then in turn that gets a negative reaction by fans, then that just shows that fans are sick and tired of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Franchise, the animes and the mangas, being used basically, in a way that makes it look like they're just trying to create a new franchise spun off from it, and they don't want that. They want it to stay true somewhat to what made Yu-Gi-Oh! Popular in the anime, in the manga from the beginning. Not go off and do something completely different. So, in closing, when I look at the series that came after the original trilogy, like I said, Zexal, I think, kept it true to its core, except for the second half when they went in the direction they did, and that kind of got people going up and down about it. Then I look at Arc 5 as really having a mixed reaction because of the concept they did there. And then VRains kind of getting more of a positive reaction and being beloved more so than Arc V, mainly because of the fact of, okay, it takes place in virtual reality. That's a unique concept and everything. But that's a unique concept and everything, and it kind of stays somewhat true, to the basis. But I think what really threw fans off about it was mostly in virtual reality. And, because they started to take that step and going into virtual reality, it's what really turned fans off, to me, in my opinion, to some parts of it as well, especially when you have your main characters, not only basically sending themselves into VR, but giving themselves these avatars that were representations of what they feel like on the inside and in the real world, and they want to bring that out in the real world, but they can't, so they're bringing it out in virtual reality, if you catch my drift. And I think, even though, like I said, the uniqueness and the concept of VR was great and everything, the fact that they mainly did all the duels through that, just, I think, threw fans off in a big way. Well, I wouldn't say a big way, but threw them off in a way that, even though they, loved it more than Arc V, it still felt like something was amiss, like something just wasn't there, wasn't clicking, if you know what I mean. And in Sevens, again, I haven't watched it, so who knows what happened there. But if the fact that they shortened it and made it the shortest anime out of the Yu-Gi-Oh anime and mangas, that again kind of tells you that maybe they're realizing that if they would have gone any further with whatever potential story or ideas were still out there to be adapted from the manga or whatever, that maybe fans wouldn't be so receptive. And now Go Rush, it's up to them. It's up to the Go Rush adaptation to see whether or not, win the fans back fully, or, go back and having, fans split down the middle, or mostly negative. Because again, I think what some fans have noticed with some of these incarnations is they're trying to maybe spin off their own series from Yu-Gi-Oh, with some of the concepts they come up with. But to me, what I'm trying to get at is, when you think about it, nothing is going to top the original trilogy, which is why it is still beloved. And again, I will give it to Zexal. The first half of Zexal, fans loved it because they true to the core. But then it just went off and did its own thing with the space, dimensions, whatever. And then you get into Arc V and what it did, and then VRains, even though there was some unique concepts that made the series, each series, anime, manga, interesting and intriguing, there was just enough there to where it either got a mixed reaction or fans just shat on it, if you will, from the start. And again, this is why I think Sevens didn't last as long, because whatever other story arcs and elements they had planned to adapt from a manga, I think they realized fans would be like, this isn't Yu-Gi-Oh, this is something else. But let's just hope Go Rush remedies that, and hopefully shows that they can shows that, hey, they are still dedicated to staying true to the original Yu-Gi-Oh franchise and what made it all concept, that is, and what made it popular, at the beginning. But what do you guys think? Let me know down below. Comment if you like. Love to hear from each and every one of you. Live chat during the premiere. Like the video. Check out my Teespring store. Also check me out at BW Rosa's Discussions, all your favorite audio podcast locations except for Pandora. Close to 300 podcast guys. And if you're listening to the podcast on Anchor.fm, listener support is activated. And if you're listening on Spotify and Amazon and Apple, that also enables video podcasting, you have your option of either listening or watching the podcast through one of those affiliates. Also check me out at BW Roses on VENMO. Also check me out at BW Roses on Patreon for the $1 to support me with a $1 or $3 tier. I am considering doing a $5 tier, but we're still thinking about that. I will let you know if I'm going to do that or not. And also check me out at Venmo at Brian-Walmer-2. But yeah, guys, I just wanted to come on here and give you my opinions as to why I think after the original trilogy, the next 3 to 4, if you will, or the next 4 Yu-Gi-Ohs that came after, got mixed reactions overall, mixed, positive, negative reactions overall. But again, let me know what your thoughts are down below. Comment if you like. Live chat during the premiere, and I'm out.